like a 20 by 30 inch sort of 3 different trays that I can mix the paint on, and then I actually get to keep the color and the notation that's happening on location, which is really helpful, right? In terms of a process, not having to translate into words sometimes for a color that's inexact can be a really effective way to actually speed up the process of observation and then carry that energy forward into the studio, because I work in studio too, especially on bigger pieces. These are all sort of my medium size range. The biggest work I do is 6 by 12 feet on location, which is quite large and a lot. Yeah.
Well, you see all this tumultuous clouds, and it looks like it could be very windy.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
How do you manage a canvas?
Oh well, I've had a bunch of them get destroyed. I weight them down. I have tent poles that I'll actually like tie everything down with, especially on windier days. And still, usually I budget about $1,000 a year for lost equipment, and about another $1,000 a year at least for lost panels or more. Especially these panels are quite expensive, so a couple of them, and it adds up quickly. That being said, for me, it's worth it because I want to be out in the energy. The whole reason for these paintings is sort of translating the felt sensation of the body, right? That, for me, I did photography, I painted, then I was in grad school, I was studying science-related stuff, and then at that time I switched from painting into photography because when I was doing the grad program in environmental policy, it was just too much to actually try and paint for my joy around it, because it's tight, but photography was accessible, so I learned, enough to actually start taking these photos and compositional questions and work out ideas visually. And so when I came out of school and I was consulting and teaching in a more environmental domain, and I started to move back to painting, there was kind of this question of why am I painting again? I thought that I would just do this for my pleasure, and then if I'm going to do it for a career, well, this was 17 years ago now, I guess, or so, 16. But then why paint? And over time, that question's actually really stuck with me up until this very day, right? Every time I have a show or paint, pretty much every painting, there's a 3-part sort of process of question that I'm pretty consistently asking, and if I'm teaching, it's one of my first things that I start with is why paint? Why paint this? And then why paint this in this way, right? And so that question, first of all, well, I like being outside and I like to not be on a computer all the time. And when I was consulting in the environmental policy world, I was writing stuff all the time. I was kind of going crazy. So being outside felt really good. But over time, and then after a while, I was like, well, it's really hard to do this. I was painting interiors, and I hinted at painting a view in your room. This is my niece, my daughter. The interiors and figures were really cool, but then I went outside, and it was really hard. It was a lot harder for me because I had no control over circumstance, right? So that actually started to bring up some pretty interesting questions about if you have a process where there's this inbuilt dimension where there's no control, like I don't know what I'm going to find out there. I can guess it's going to be rainy, right? But the dynamics of storms on any given day are completely different. And sometimes something like this will happen and then an hour later it'll be totally gone. So if I set up and I'm all excited about this and it's totally gone, I'm not painting what I thought I was going to paint. It's almost guaranteed. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing because life kind of, reflects that, right? Like nothing in life is really all that guaranteed, nor can we really predict what's coming down the line. We'd be going down a road thinking we're going to Whole Foods and then end up in a hospital. All sorts of things happen. So there's this, sort of interesting space within a frame where uncertainty enters and unpredictability enters. And that started to be like, well, I thought I was out there painting landscape because I wanted to just learn how to paint a cloud and make it look like a mountain. And then I remember the first time I really tried plein air at a 12 by 48 size was because there was a sunset on Taos Mountain. I was like, holy crap, I think I could do it. I'm gonna try. And I did, and then it fell down in the dirt. And I thought I was gonna stop painting, and I was like, no, I'll try to finish. And I got a piece I liked, it was fine. But at that time, the reason to paint then was because I didn't know if I could actually paint something that looked like a thing outside. I knew I could do it inside, but then outside I wasn't sure. Well, over the next 5 years, I went around New Mexico and did a lot of things. I traveled everywhere, all these places, stalking sort of the exquisite moment of sunset in Abiquiu, and where Jojo O'Keeffe painted her painting, or I literally painted a piece where Maynard Dixon painted a piece. I go around finding these big, high-value moments, these wow moments. And then when Breyer was born, it all changed because I was home much more, and I had to be closer to home, and so driving 4 hours at sunset wasn't necessarily a viable thing if I had to be home to put her to bed. And so the structure of the painting process had to change as a result of being a parent, and what came out of it is my favorite thing in my art experience so far, which is the deepening of being in one place through time, and that's where that big, large mountain project came from. I did a multi-5-year project on the Taos Gorge from a different view, and had a whole show, just one view, and different size compositions and whatnot, but the same view. And over time, well, that started to be a much more interesting answer for me about why I paint, because one, well, it's a deep relationship with uncertainty, but then also within that uncertainty is something deeply known, familiar. And in the familiarity, there comes boredom, but then out of the boredom comes new discovery, right? And that dynamic to me feels much more therapeutic and interesting as a process to relate to through time. So why paint? Well, because painting offers a way and a format that I can relate to questions that I don't even know I have, and then keep on asking them and finding new answers each time. And I can do it in one place that's around the corner from my house that I never would have looked at before. This location is a good example. I really didn't like this location until I started painting it. Now I love this location. But it's because I spent a lot of time getting to know this weirdo hamburger looking tree. You know, like you're like, this wash of pinon and juniper and the path that runs through, well, now I mountain bike around all through here all the time. It's a wonderful trail system, right? And there's this personal relationship that develops. So why paint? But then why paint this? You know, because this is familiar and close to home, it starts to open up deeper questions. If I go and paint the Tetons, which I have done, right, but I don't know them, I'm first getting to meet them, and then it's a long-form development of a relationship where then the questions I have change. When I did the 10,000 Mountains paintings of Taos Mountain, I literally had painted it already for a whole project, about 50 different paintings over 10 years. I thought I was done painting the mountain, and then I got out there, started these little studies, and one season of 72 panels turned into 2, and then into 5, and when I was in the middle of like the 3rd season or something, I was looking at the mountain peak, and I realized that for 12 years I hadn't noticed like a pretty significant like aspect of the mountain's profile. If it was a portrait, it'd be like I was misdrawing like one nostril of the mountain, you know, like for 10 years. I'm a pretty good draftsperson, but the act of looking repeatedly actually had me meeting a bias, my own conceptual bias, that I wouldn't have known had I not been actually relating to something through time. And when I started thinking about conceptual bias, or when I started thinking about uncertainty, these are like concepts that are straight out of systems complexity and dealing with nonlinear change in the world. This is stuff out of the work I was doing on ecological systems, right? It's like conceptually super high fidelity. And it was part of why when I was working with the University of New Mexico, I was working on programming where the art process was being used as a tool for understanding the complexity outside the art process, because the act of looking itself teaches us something about the things that we are looking at, but also something about ourselves and where we are resistant. Like my favorite exercise really to do with students early on is when you're like drawing anything from life. If you approach it with some preconception of what it is, you almost invariably make a pretty crappy drawing, right? It's not going to be great. So like the exercise is what a door is not a door. Like you go and paint the door, and we all imagine a door. Now when I'm imagining a door, it's got a little metal handle right now. It's a wood door. There's a couple glass panels, and I'm imagining I would like paint the doorknob. But when I look at a door here, this is a metal door over there. There's glass. It looks nothing like what I'm imagining. So this idea of door, this is not the same. Like none of us think about the same door when we talk about a door. It's a concept, and it's such a silly concept that it's a really useful exercise, because when you draw a door, we could all draw this door, and every single drawing would have to be different, because actually how we are viewing it changes the nature of the thing we are seeing. Well, that's really interesting, because then if we try to have a conversation about a single concept as simple as a door, we could get into an argument if we don't realize that we're all painting it from different perspectives. Well, that sounds really interesting when you talk about like political situation or economic policy, environmental issues, because everybody's stakeholder is looking at these issues from different perspectives. It's kind of helpful to have some basic ideas that just because we see it differently doesn't necessarily mean this vision or that vision is wrong. It might mean that it's really an interesting synthesis to bring it all together, right? Well, I got really excited when these ideas started popping out, and then when I was thinking about painting, the landscape started to become a really interesting way to relate, because it's universal. You know, like my taste is abstract work. The reason I got here right at 11 is because Naomi and I were over next door looking at a completely abstract Diebenkorn painting, right? Like it's non-objective, it's lines. I like that stuff. So it's this riddle why I'm painting landscape painting where you can recognize it's a landscape and there's a view, like Breyer knows that this is Rift Valley from a steakout restaurant, right? Well, I like non-objective work that's like a circle embossed into a piece of paper is my favorite example. That's what Naomi and I have in our bedroom, and we're gonna hang out here shortly. And it's a circle, it's pressed into a piece of paper. There's no color, there's no paint, there's nothing. But it changes in time. So like when the sun hits at one angle, you get this cast shadow and the circle appears. But it doesn't look like a circle, it's actually this stretched oblong thing, right? Because of how the sun is hitting it. But then in the middle of the day, the circle disappears because the sun shines on it directly and there's no circle at all. But it's the same piece, right? So it's changing through time. That interests me. But then why a landscape painting with an image? And why paint this? And then why paint it in this way, right? Why up to an image? I could do a landscape and I could go in a direction like Jackson Pollock and have it be completely, I am nature, right? I'm part of nature and I'm doing all this stuff and then there's no image, it's just the expression of existing in a moment. They have Hans Hofmann paintings next door, which is really fun too, because Hofmann was Jackson Pollock's teacher, and actually Pollock and Hofmann had one of the more interesting art conversations that's been written in my opinion. And the gist basically went when Hoffman was at Pollock's studio looking at the work. He said, are you painting from life, or like, how are you doing this? Are you painting from nature, or is it just out of your mind? And basically, in the short of it, Pollock said, I am nature. And that was that, right? Which is, I think, a pretty arrogant, interesting thing to say. But it also could be really cool and humble, right? Like, you don't quite know. I mean, you can guess maybe with Pollock's sort of overall personality that we think of him, perhaps it was a more arrogant statement. Hoffman said, well, that's your error. You're going to have problems. You're going to start repeating yourself. And so there was this fundamental, Hoffman said, you really need to be based on something. You got to be looking at something as if you're getting a still life, right? Well, it's a really interesting conversation for me when we're talking about painting, because my whole process is becoming and allowing nature to be a part of the process, right? If I go out on location and I'm painting plein air, one of the main things about plein air is not having control. Also, the weather changes and you end up totally shape-shifted by what's going on. If it's windy, I'm sitting here like this, being like, this sucks, I hate this. And if it's sunny and beautiful but not too hot, then I'm kind of usually like this. If there's snow, I'm cold, and there's a deliberate design to this process, because then the actual elements of nature become the invitation to respond to a moment. And
I just had a question.
Sure.
Because you did photography before. Do you, if there's a special image and it's changing momentarily that you want to really fix in your mind, do you take photos of it?
Sure, absolutely. Most helpful for me these days is I'll set up my iPhone on a tripod and I'll take a time-lapse video. So it'll just composite photos through the whole afternoon. And the reason, what I found is, why paint this, why paint this in this way? Well, originally I thought I was painting landscape paintings, and then at some point in the last 10 years I realized I've never painted landscape. I paint things that we call landscape because we recognize it, but this is autobiography, right? This is the experience of being a human in a place, channeled by way of my body, and this isn't what it looked like, but you can kind of recognize that this is the place. What I'm actually painting is the experience of being alive. And I'm using the scaffolding of landscape imagery as a reason and a way for us to have an experience that's shared, right? But the actual reality is there's no landscape here. This cloud, if we just take this out there, that doesn't mean anything to paint. But then in the context, well, then it starts to be naked cloud. Loose cloud, but cloud. This by itself is, abstraction. But here, well, it starts to mean bush, right? So when I started thinking, well, okay, if what I'm really painting is energy and experience and being alive and sharing this experience and perception of whatever, and then the flow that transmits through gesture and color and the way our bodies receive visual information. And last night at the opening, I was talking with this researcher who was researching opsins in our eyes that receive color, right? Like basically our rods and cones, but then also it turns out we have light receptors in our body all over. So there's a whole new category of these compounds that this guy's talking about. The last 20 years they've been discovering sort of sequentially. It turns out that we feel literally sunset. We don't just see it and go, ah, that's nice. Your eyes could be closed, but your body would be receiving the light and feeling when it got past sunset time, and then all of a sudden your body does this amazing stuff, like you want to go to sleep, to change your appetite, all sorts of interesting things. So this idea of translating sensation into the felt body was really cool to chat with him about. And when it comes to taking a photo then, at first I was taking photos so I could try to get it accurately, and really like get that image. And I realized, well, one, okay, you can do it, but a lot of times my experience of paintings that are hyper-realistic is they tend to fall flat. They tend to go stale or stiff. And it can be satisfying on a like intellectual level, and I can go, wow, technical achievement, super rad. Amazing that person had the discipline to sit there for 2 months meticulously doing a thing. It is incredible. I personally started to go crazy when I painted the self-portrait in the bathroom in Mamaroneck. That shit drove me crazy. It was like 2 weeks in a bathroom and us like around an easel in boxers and rubber gloves and a weirdo thing, and like the painting's cool. All my New York friends and artists love that painting. Love it. I look at it and I feel like, oh my god.
If I ever see green marble tile again, we're gonna kill it.
I'm really happy I'm So that's not where I'm at. So this landscape thing started to be right, like here we are, out in the middle of nowhere in this expansive experience, and then paint becomes this really exciting tool for translating energy, for feeling. If you think about a Van Gogh painting or a Monet water lily painting, there's a sense of calm in those water lilies, despite the fact that those surfaces are ridiculously worked. That dude was on those paintings for a long time. It's kind of like my buddy David Grossman's work, right? Those are so poetic and calming, some of my favorite art. And yet he's working surface for months, and if you look close, I am consistently surprised how much surface work there is. It's real lot like Monet water lilies, right? Well, there's a message that develops through time over the paint. And sometimes the surface of paint I don't like a lot of paint on at all, which is hilarious because I use a lot, right? Other times it can be something that actually communicates, like Braille in a book or something where we have this textural experience of something. And like we feel light, my sense personally, the feeling I get is that my body responds to the textural surface as much as anything else, which means a photo doesn't necessarily actually get me the information I need in the studio. Why do I mix on location instead of do all the writing? I used to do the writing, and I'm all for writing something and turning it into a poem and making it a song and then making it back into a painting, because through those translations there's a lot of information that shakes out between the modalities. And if I'm not careful, and certainly if the students I have aren't careful, they'll end up focusing on the photo and you'll get this flattened, not so dimensional experience of color that lacks the unexpected. Because the photos reduce things for them, they don't have to figure out what's in that middle space between the highlight and the dark spot. They don't have to struggle in that space and take a guess that it might be lime green. And then realize that it's not lime green, but there's something else that we perceived and felt that the lime green in this dark spot actually means. I don't know why. Like I guarantee you, this was not there that day. No, nor was that, right? There's no such thing as that in the sky, right? And these colors, this is actually fairly accurate to the underside of clouds when there's a sunny day in Taos, because the sun hits the ground, bounces up and warms up these clouds, especially these clouds that are feeders, that are far out in front of a central thunderstorm stack like this. In here, it's always going to be purpler and bluer because there's a deep shadow and there's no light that's bouncing the warm light frequencies back up to the other side of the clouds. So this is kind of a real thing. Maybe slightly less dramatic. Sometimes there's more dramatic colors than that on the undersides of clouds. But that's not real. That is an artifact of the painting process. And yet that red color, those things like that, they live on these days because my underpainting is like that, and red is all over here because that's the scaffolding by which I set up the pieces.
So is that underpainting acrylic?
No, it's usually quinacridone red or magenta, sometimes a purple, sometimes dioxazine purple, but usually...
You just do it ahead of time so it's dry and
I do it on location, wet and wet. Yeah, and I use Galkid gel medium, which dries more quickly, so generally the whole mixture, like this works because I paint fast, right? If I was painting over the course of a week or 2 weeks, then I would have to be a little bit more mindful about the proportions layer by layer. And indeed, in some of these paintings, right, if they dry and then I have something to go back to, it's either they are totally cured and dry, and then I paint a layer on top of it that actually dries more slowly so that we don't get cracking, or I just scrape the thing back, right? One of the biggest challenges with my process is I don't get to go and correct stuff. I either have to hit it or I have to scrape it and redo it, right? It's a concession of the texture and stuff like that. This type of stuff to really cure takes 6 months to a year to truly cure before you can varnish it, right? Otherwise, you can end up screwing up the drying process. That's a long time, and it means that I have to make choices on the fly. And if Ryder will attest to this, right? Like I have paintings, and sometimes after school I have to go finish a painting because I only have 3 hours to do it, right? And then that window, the drying window starts, and it's going to mess up the surface. Coming back to really circle back on your question though, the time lapses, they tell a story about time and change. And these are paintings that are, essentially records of time and change, right? This moment never truly existed. This was a composite of all the moments that were out there. This was an impression, I had a moment when I snapshotted the cloud, but then I also had the fact that this cloud grew and disappeared while I was there. And then these cycled up. And then these back there cycled up. And what you're actually seeing is the pattern and impressions of a pattern that happened throughout the course of the day. There was never one moment when the shadow was just like this. The shadow was here on there, and then there was another one that extended out here. And as a composite, it felt more whole to say have these shadows like that, than to just have it be full sun on that particular day. Other ones there are just full sun.
So the sky is so dynamic, and the ground and planter are dynamic too, but they're not going to be changing as much as shadow.
Exactly.
So do you, with your thing to really changing movement, you start with sky and work?
Right, yeah, good question. So it'll depend on the day, right? Because sometimes the sky's moving so quickly that if I don't actually get a fundamental structure, I know I will collapse in the change. I'll get overwhelmed and I'll get pissed off that I can't seem to get what I'm looking for, and it feels wrong and I'll get all stressed out. So usually as a part of my own personal and emotional management on location, I'll try to find something that feels solid first, then I can build off of some solidity, right? And oftentimes that'll mean that it's the underlying structure of the drawing is solid enough. I know, like you're saying, this group of trees not going to be walking off anytime soon. Most that'll happen is that we'll get it in the shadow, or we'll have it in the light, right? Not so bad. But then up in the sky, changing all the time. And what really I try to go for is, I'll try to watch the patterns. So like maybe you've seen me do this, like I'll sit all morning being like, oh my gosh, should I go paint now? Should I go now? And I'm looking at the clouds and it's stressful and it's energy building, but there's also a lot of information actually that's happening. The process has already started, I just haven't gotten to the canvas. What's going on is actually internalizing information and feeling a pattern, and there's a sensation of, oh, something's gonna happen. And then when I get on location, if the sky's changing a lot, I'm not gonna be too distracted by the specifics of the change in any moment. There's the ability then in that moment that I've been working on through the day to feel the overall flow. And then move really quickly when there is a particular shape of the cloud that I love. Like this really is a shape of the cloud that happened right here. It wasn't I'm not inventing this stuff. These are observations that come together. These clouds really did start to form in front of this cloud. But when I started painting down here, these clouds weren't there. They happened later. They moved forward, right? And so there's this curation that's happening on the fly on location where I'm a very fast painter, but I work really, 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 really hard to become fast enough that I can translate things quickly. And as I've asked those questions, why paint, why paint this, why paint this way, well then I've started to give myself more license for some of the most pleasurable experiences of painting I personally had to start to happen more often, right? Like in here, I wouldn't have let this live on 5 or even 10 or even 5 years ago in the way that now it lives on, to say that I wouldn't have just let this mark live. I would have tried to go back to the studio and neaten it up and give it more of that contour, right? Model it more. Think Maynard Dixon, right? But for me now, these things are actually super valuable because of the energy of the difference between their two mark presences, right? If you think of this as an abstraction, these are just energetic marks that live together with some texture in the middle. Well, that has a lot of value now in a context that I personally wouldn't maybe have seen the value before, because I, hopefully continue to be growing here. And part of that, again, guess the sense is, why paint this in this way? Well, because this, to me, it brings it kind of full circle to the mystery of how we see anything at all, or how we even understand a single thing, right? Like a big 350 panel painting, I did really interesting conversation always about time and change, and then sometimes people will get into emotion because they'd be oftentimes moved, or transformation, and that one really stuck with me, this idea of transformation and the capacity of any medium artistically to communicate and initiate some kind of change in us that we can't even predict. I often, last night I talked a few times about the Van Gogh Starry Night painting being one that I saw in the MoMA, I saw it when I was in high school, and it really changed my life. And it's a painting on the wall. Like that doesn't make as much sense to me as, say, my trip to West Africa. Like that one, I'm like, well, I was in West Africa, there's different cultures, I saw a different world. People acted differently. I learned how to dance. A bunch of people laughed at me, a big community dance, and then hugged me, and I felt received and healed and all this stuff. Like, that makes sense. But looking at a painting on a wall has a bit of a magic mystery to me, because it's a thing on a wall, and yet it affected me it continues to affect me. I don't know why. There's something transcendent in the paint itself, in the shape and the contour, whatever it is. And maybe it's not like this. My dog Osha did not care about my paintings, and one time took a crap on one. You know, like, he really thought it was the best place to take a crap. Bless his heart. I was upset with him. It really was not my favorite place for him to do that. But he didn't relate to this the way we do. So why we do is a mystery of human cognition. I don't fully understand. The person yesterday was really nice to chat with about it. What I can say is that something happens enough that something like this getting to live on, or this yellow living on, or this part living on, and not being messed with, communicates an appreciation for what happened then, and for me, reminds me of what happened then in that moment, enough that I want to not have a complete chaos thing that gets in the way of being able to relate to it, but also I don't want to manicure and fiddle with it to the point where the essential magic mystery of whatever the hell is going on actually is lost, right? That for me would be sacrilege to the process and to the work itself, and therefore time lapses and a static image is a helpful data point, but the actual hope is that the energy of the moment and the emotion actually translates through. So sometimes that's a practical thing of having color in the studio that actually mixed on location. Then I'm not trying to fabricate. What was that feeling I felt when I was out there and thinking about awe and inspiration? And that was like a phthalo green, you know, like that wouldn't make sense. In the studio, I just say, oh, that was that moment that the cloud was going crazy, and I can tell because that's the color right there, right? Super easy. But it also then allows this sort of surprise aspect in paintings to come forward and keep existing and live in this space of it is an image, but then it's also just paint. You know, like holy moly, I love this stretch of the painting. Super, super, super fun right in there. And then there's another one over here too. Like this is sagebrush. Totally doesn't. Okay, it's two-dimensional. It's a two-dimensional swath of color with a almost cartoon outline. Oh my God, I love that spot. It's one of my favorite spots in any painting here. Gets to live on, and in that sort of space between two-dimensional, the image breaks apart and the sense no longer makes sense anymore, and then the reconstruction of sense in the whole that, well, that's a storm, that's hitting Tower Mountain, and I really look that way. I have the photo, and the time lapse.
Do you have a comfort food location?
Do I have a comfort food location?
Yeah, someplace that you go, you're like,
I have my blankie. Yeah, I have my blankie spot. This has become one of them, really. If I'm just at a loss, I can go here, I can look at great distance. Usually something interesting is going on, and then I can go for a mountain bike ride, which is also really good to keep things moving. The Taos, I feel like every spot that I end up actually painting a lot in has become a place that for some reason is the place I need to be in. And usually it's a place I need to be in. It's not like some brilliant artistic thing. That's never how it's actually felt. I didn't start painting Taos Mountain because it was some brilliant artistic moment, though it turned out very well for me in a lot of spaces critically. The reason was because I was going through a divorce and I was sad and I couldn't paint a big painting. Like, it's not very exciting, on the exterior, right? Well, then because of that actual lived life, multiple panels started to happen because I was like, well, it's yellow and I don't know, I have a show, I gotta paint something. I don't want to paint a big piece, but it turned into 4 panels, and then it turned into 10, and then 20, and then 350. And then the same thing like with Briar when she was born. It wasn't like some brilliant artistic innovation. It was like, well, shit, what am I going to do now? I can't go far. I got to do something different. Wow, this river is cool. And I ended up painting the river bends for 2 years, right? And then came up with that whole sequence of seasons that are freaking awesome. I love those paintings.
What about the reverse? There are places that you've gone back to and you've been like, what happened to this? You know, like it wasn't that nice feeling. You know, like there's the calm, happy sigh of the spaghetti or whatever versus the, you know, where to go or, you know.
Well, actually, in my most recent show prior to this was a show on dreams, and a lot of my art process is mediated by dreaming, right? And I'm an artist because a series of dreams told me I could be an artist, you know, basically was what really initiated this process. And then taught me, you know, about how many pieces I needed to have, the portfolio I needed to build. I talked with curators and dreams that told me how to present paintings, and specific artists that I was supposed to meet and chat with. Okay, so I had this show about dreams, and I actually, every painting in the show was mediated by dreams. This location all happened because of a dream. One of the spots in that show was one that I had done a bunch of paintings at, and Altamira has placed a couple big ones from this spot. It was my homeward location, and I went there in the dream. There's this great painting, it was big, it was beautiful, it was like storms over the mountains, it was wow, homeward calm was the title I was told. And then I went to the spot, and it had been fenced off, and I couldn't paint there anymore. Let me tell you, I had a shit fit. I was pissed. Fencing off public lands, whole sort of tyrant about it. And it turned out I will never be able to paint there again. Yeah. And that's it. It was a 7-year project that ended quite abruptly, unanticipatedly, and became a completely different experience from a spot I normally would have gone to really relax. The result, though, is then I ended up finding other spots and really re-meeting Taos in a way I had no idea, actually, down this really cool road that I thought about you on, a really cool stretch of land I had no idea that is on the other side of this Rift Valley. It turns out I didn't know this, but this is one parking area, and the National Monument built a second parking area right over here. And you can enter this whole area. It's like I don't know how many square miles it is. It's a very large area, but there are 2 parking spots, you know, about 10 miles from each other, here and here. So I ended up finding this one because I couldn't paint to that homeward one anymore, and, you know, ongoing sort of meandering river stone and water. Anyway, any more questions of specific stuff? I can keep going for a very long time.
I'm just very amateurish, but so when I look at my paintings chronologically, I can see that I just wondered if there's a chronological order of these, because I imagine it took some time to do.
Yeah, this is all one season in New Mexico, so pretty much April through late July this year. I'm trying to think which one was first. That one I think was the first one, the square on the right there. So I don't see.
So because it seems like the clouds or the sky is, the theme that is really dynamic and changes a lot. So, the sky there and the sky there are totally different.
100%.
Clouds are kind of, it just happens into the way they were that day or.
Yeah. So I would say, given that this was a stretch of about 4 months of painting time, I would say more was the change day to day than in my personal process. That said, things always happen, right? Like last night, we was having a chat with the people who ended up buying this painting, and I was saying, why, this one really, I really like this piece a lot, and for me, it's like I looked here and the way the clouds in the sky happened, I was freaking out. I was painting down here, and then the clouds did this thing, and I was like, oh, this is awesome, but I had no time to do it, and so I was literally just, in 2 hands sometimes, right? Like really, I'll have 2 hands, and I'll do blue, and then I'll do this at the same time. And I really liked what happened there. That was a moment of actual growth, painting-wise, that I knew was happening. A lot of times things are happening on the surface, and what do we know? It was 4 years later, we realized, oh my God, we've changed a lot.
So it didn't start out intentionally as a did.
No, a lot of my work doesn't. And in fact, I have a whole stretch of a body of paintings I've been working on for a long form, 3 years now, that are stretch on and on into many panels and go in all sorts of ways depending on the subject, like 13 panels and stuff. Yeah, just keep on going, trying to this idea of like, there's this notion that we have a frame that limits the image, and with these I actually took the frame off and have this levitating mount for a particular reason, which is I wanted the object, the painting image to actually float off the wall without any interference, just to see how it feels. And I like it a lot. But the frame has this sort of implicit, implied like rules, like you've come up with a good composition within a space. And that's really cool. There are all these really amazing things that happen because of that frame. But it's also really cool sometimes to actually let the process build out in the ways that are unexpected in the looking, because the landscape is this infinite flow. Every time that there's an end point to a painting, there's the implied expansive reality that just continues on forever beyond it, which is philosophically I find really exciting. And those diptychs, triptychs, quadriptychs, the things that happen, they are usually where the progress of the weather builds forward. So at first, that one was a good example. It was cloudy and raining way off in the distance, and then as the atmospherics of this particular part of the season in New Mexico happen, it's always the clouds always build over the mountains first. So I can predict it'll be over the San Francisco's, and then it'll be over these mountains, which are the southern part of the San Juans in Colorado, and then the Brazos in New Mexico. And they're high enough, and the way the moisture and the wind almost always happens is that the winds blow usually from southwest to northeast. They hit this rise in the plateau from 5,000 feet to 7,000 feet, where Taos is at 7, and over down here is like 5,000, 5,500. They hit that, the air starts going up, and then it hits another sort of shelf and goes up even more, and these thunderheads pop almost, like clockwork at 11 a.m. or so most days in the monsoon season. And then on the San Francisco's, depending on how much moisture is in the atmosphere, it's like a 40% chance of rain. Usually at 10 or 11, they start stacking over the San Francisco's also. And that ends up being the progression. And so in this case, same thing happened. He started building, and then as I was out there on that particular day, it built forward really fast and like out towards me much more quickly than I was guessing.
I try to visualize how you have a canvas on an easel, and then you stick another canvas on top of it.
Irwin quick grip clamps. Really awesome. Yeah, I clamped them like crazy. I have all these heavy duty construction clamps. I'm probably bankrolling my local hardware store. Yeah, and you clamp them together and then paint over. And a lot of times, right, like in this case, I may have actually structured this painting to make more sense with, say, truncated sky or something when the clouds were smaller. I will just scrape it off or paint right on top of it and then move up. And then, this felt really nicely balanced as a taller painting anyway, so that worked out well, right? I mean, if it didn't, it wouldn't have survived the whole day, but yeah, I mean, and if it didn't, I also could have added a third panel probably, right? That would have been really fun. Harder to sell, honestly. Those ones can really, the super tall ones that are narrow can be trickier to find homes for, but I really like painting them, so I can still go for it. Yeah, these two are kind of fun. I was happy that you guys found these on the wall this way, sort of as parallels with this walking rain here in one way, and then this one in the other. This was coming this way, so from like west to east across the gorge, and it was raining over the gorge, but then here was still having some sun peeking through in the last little breaks in the clouds. And this one was the opposite, where we're in the west looking east, so we're in the east looking west there, and in this case the opposite. And here's the sun, the San Francisco's, the clouds were forming, and you had this really cool shadow rain thing going. But as happens in New Mexico on somewhat dry days, the rain actually didn't hit the ground much more than in the high peaks a little bit, and then it dissipated. Yeah, really fun. Yeah.
You ever paint upside down?
Do I ever paint upside down? I mean, we're just turning the paintings upside down. Sure, that's
I don't used to one good.
Yeah, well, you never know. I'm trying. I run a lot. I don't usually stand on my head. I don't very often these days. I find that was a really awesome tool, right? A lot of times in painting classes and courses, I recommend it because you can see what things are undone. For whatever reason, I just don't. I know when I turn them over, I mean, occasionally I'll be like, oh, I'll have to turn it over. I don't really get much from it usually, you know, because I think partly it's because a lot of my paintings already existing in a deliberately undone way, right? There's this kind of fabric of undoneness. So when I turn it upside down, I'm looking at lack of context. Some of the balance pieces don't orchestrate in terms of like how the painting's meant to be seen, right? If I flip that one over, the rain all of a sudden is upside down and looking at it. You know, I don't know, I mean it's fun. But yeah, no, I don't do it that much. But I think it's a good exercise. Whatever works really. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it all palette knife, or you use other, fingers, or?
Yes, all of it. Not, except not palette knives. I use palette knives, you're totally right, and the surface is a brother of palette knives, right? It's silicone spatulas, and the reason I like them is they move like a brush, right? If you use them.
Paint pusher thing?
Yeah, paint pusher things. Princeton Catalyst has the whole line with the long handles, and then the angled shape, and so you have this long handle and angled shape. One is really helpful because the biggest paintings on location I'll do are like 9 feet tall, right? So I have to jump really high, or have a tool that's really big. And these long handle ones are really good for kind of getting higher up. And they're quiet. I don't like palette knives actually because they're really scrapey. So like when out there in nature listening to birds, it's cheep cheep cheep. It's not very fun. Whereas when I'm cheep cheep cheeping with the spatulas, it's fine. Cheep 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 away. It's quiet. And then big brushes. Yeah, big brushes all over. You can see that, you know, a lot of times the brush marks are where they're visible. It's kind of obvious that's a brush, but a lot of the work actually is brush first, and most of the time people will assume it's not, but a lot of times it's brush first, and I just go over and smooth the brush marks out. Because I like brush more, generally. I like how brush can, there's the calligraphic quality of the brush, and there's a flow and a movement that actually feels much more musical. And the spatulas have some of that, but not all of it. So they're useful, and spatulas are really useful for filling in immense spaces. I would not probably be able to do what I do without them. You know, people use palette knives. Louise Mapwing, if you know her work, she used palette knives and trowels. But for me, the main thing I don't like about that usually is that it ends up feeling much more sterile and metallic. You can actually see the metallic quality in the tooling, and that is left over in the paint. I didn't like that sensation. I didn't like the sound, and so the spatulas were really where I went. These days, I've also upgraded for bigger paintings to squeegees, window squeegees, full-on origination window squeegees. So like, I'll be out there going like this with squeegees. It's very messy, but it really is awesome. I love it. So that's a new thing. I'm just starting to experiment. The 12-foot painting in Dreamtime Emissaries was squeegee, underneath. And that's helpful for underpainting in broad areas actually too. Yeah, because they're super fast. And then fingers, definitely, absolutely. There are actual fingerprints in spots. Every now and then, Briar Rose has a spot in the painting that she's worked on, right? Yeah. So there's a couple that are Jivan and Briar originals. Yeah. Trying to think what else. Pretty much that's it. Not sticks or anything. There's dirt in some of the paintings for sure. And I don't think this particular show has them, but when I say dirt in some of the paintings, I actually mean like quite literally. I've had some paintings get blown and covered in dirt enough that becomes the middle tone, and I scrape off the dirt and it reveals a much brighter color because I actually painted it brighter, and then the dirt is made it dirty. But when it's in the bottom here, well, it's kind of convenient because it so happens I'm trying to paint dirt, so the dirt being there is not that big a problem. But then if I want to actually get the shadows and light, I can scrape the dirt off and you'll get this really, it's awesome, super fun. So you'll see dirt in paintings, and that's definitely deliberate. In some cases, there's these little gift, moments, like this piece has pebbles right here. It makes me really happy. That's because, I leaned it on the ground or whatever, so this is a piece of actual place, and the little quartzite crystals are in the painting. You see those little pieces? Yeah, and those are sort of just donations that I say thank you for. Yeah, this one has some dirt in it too. Yeah, every now and then there's bugs. Mostly I don't like that. They go in there, and you see them. They make little bug tracks that walk up the paintings, like in the paint, and you see these little lines, and it's like little, and then all of a sudden they got in a deep part sometimes that's where the bug met its end and actually still be in there. Once they're yeah. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
You talked about this like magic mystery moment you feel when looking at Van Gogh.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say over the years that you feel that moment and that feeling more in the field, or when you're looking at your paintings afterward?
That's a fun question. So there's this one Van Gogh piece that's not Starry Night, and I painted a painting, and then I ended up seeing the piece, and it was like a connection moment where something electric happened, right? And I think it was an orchard painting of Van Gogh's, some trees or something like that. But you know, a lot of times he had really red trunks, and I didn't know why he did that. I thought maybe it was because like he was post-impressionist, right? So it wasn't even at the point Van Gogh started working. He was like kind of trying to get real color, but then he was moving into gesture and line and symbolic drawing, where this line doesn't exist, but who cares because it's saying something really interesting that has energy. And then it went off into the Fauvists and all the modernist stuff of the 20th century, where like it went into Picasso breaking apart the figure and rock, and then Pollock and Transcendentalist painter, blah blah blah. But that moment with Van Gogh in the orchard, where there was this red trunk, I was painting in Taos in 2011 or something, and it was sunset, and I mean, damn it, my trunk was bright fire, like fire escape red.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why I was doing that, and luckily at that point I started developing the skill to be like, something's happening, I don't understand, but usually that means it's better than if I take it away, so I left it in there. Then I saw the Van Gogh painting in this red trunk, and I realized like it was speaking to that space and visual experience that's between the object and what we think we understand. There's this middle sensation, which is when our brain is actually feeling color, and there's a magic quality. It's like when you're looking at a big mountain and there's something around the mountain, right? It's like auras or whatever it is. We want to use the words that make sense, but that quality is in this middle space. And I feel like in Starry Night, what really struck me was the flow in the sky, and then in some of Van Gogh's cypresses too that were at the MoMA, the flow in the sky. When I read some article that some researchers have done analysis of the geometries and the sort of physics that Van Gogh had theoretically painted, and it turned out that he had really, really, really closely represented fluid dynamics in the actual atmosphere when the wind blows, right? Like this guy in 1895 had actually painted stuff that scientists figured out was super duper accurate to actual dynamics of invisible flows in the atmosphere in like 2000, 100 years later. And why and how is that happening? To me, feels like that magic quality, right? So out in the field, frankly, I'm mostly grumpy or scared or like excited and maybe totally self-absorbed in the experience of just trying to make a painting happen. So it's not often that I'm really reflective. I'd say when I'm looking at my work now, there's a sensation of appreciation for whatever it was that troubled, kind of amazing human was working on, that somehow manifested this work that has been profoundly changing to the world over, and yet came from a life that was really complex, as we know, it goes, but as far as we understand from its history, pretty complex life. And there's something in that that translates for me in the reading of his paintings now that I feel pretty fully has got a pretty strong emotional quality to talk about now. There's a few other artists that feel that way about. Agnes Pelton lately has been deeply affecting me, and she was an artist who's actually much more closely connected to Taos, to a transcendentalist painter, painting this notion that spiritual experience and transcendental experience, whatever you want to call it, right? Experience beyond the confines of our own mind could actually be expressed directly in the form of a painting, like a yantra in some traditions in Asia, right? Where like you draw this thing and the thing itself actually is communicating information, which now, in light of my conversation with that scientist last night, feels all more like real, like objective in a way I wasn't anticipating. The sense that our bodies are feeling light, and literally light is reflecting off of paintings and all sorts of other stuff. But there's something in Van Gogh's things so that I feel I would say it comes out in painting, but honestly, the biggest challenge in place in painting right now is actually letting it be fun
Yeah.
in the moment, and actually allowing the experience of joy to be the thing that structures the work, and trusting that doesn't mean like all of a sudden it's a flaccid experience that has no spine, but it does mean that having the ability to actually relinquish control over my predetermination and trust that the exquisite following will lead to something profound somewhere in my personal experience, or maybe the shared experience, that has had a lot of that's where the edge is. And I think anytime, when I look at painters who have ascended in the ranks of our estimation, usually, 90% of the time, I think there's something I glean from that experience. Rothko comes up a lot too. Rothko's work, Colorfield, work, in a similar sense of what's being transmitted in a way that we don't necessarily, we can't explain. And for me, it's my litmus test for the art that I personally esteem versus the stuff that isn't for me. Generally, it has to do with something I can't quite explain, but I'm feeling at a level that takes me a while to acclimate to. And then once I've acclimated to it, I just want to be with it all the time. Right? Yeah. So Van Gogh continues to circle around in that way. Also for the struggles that I read in his paintings, because it's not like, in his work I don't personally see just beauty. I see a lot of stuff that seems violent and challenged and quite having a struggle. Seen literally in the marks, right? So there's a certain whole process editing work where you can see the whole story. Maybe if you're reading close enough, you can see, you can probably tell me what word you should go have. It's in there. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a live and ongoing thing in the process. Are we there? Have we made our way to the end?
Thanks, Jivan.
Yeah, absolutely.